back here on the Rich Eisen Show. Good friend and one of the all-time best, Bob Costas. Good to see you, sir. How are you?
Good. Good. I decided to dress up for the program. I mean, Tony looks very, very dapper. And
Well, he's presidential.
This is the best I could do.
He's presidential.
Yeah, that's true.
So
That's true.
I just interviewed a president of the United States.
You did, in a certain sense.
But you watch Scandal, right?
Yeah.
I've watched it many different times.
It's a really well-written show.
It is. It's one of those guilty pleasure type shows.
Yeah.
And
it's smart and kitschy at the same time.
Oh gosh, yeah. And my gosh, the president of the United States barely does anything in that show except make out with Nnamdi Asomugha's wife on television every single week. And you, sir, how many presidents have you interviewed? Actual, real, live presidents of the United States.
Interviewed, okay. I interviewed Ford.
When?
On Later. Remember the Later show that came on after David Letterman?
I missed that show.
He was out of office at that time. I met Nixon when he was on the Today Show once. It was long after he was out of office.
What? Because you were in the building?
I was in the building, and I knew he was a baseball fan. And to my surprise, he recognized me from the Game of the Week with Tony Kubek. He was a genuine baseball fan, really knew his baseball, and wanted to talk about. He liked Archie Vaughan a lot, who was a shortstop for the Pittsburgh. Yeah. He had his own. He had his own like all-time team, and he wanted Archie Vaughan somehow to be on it. And I don't know how you say to a former president, even one who had to leave office under adverse circumstances. Yes, Mr. President, but what about? Honus Wagner, or what about Cal Ripken?
Well, Nixon was known to apparently call in to Redskins practices.
Yes.
To offer up plays to George Allen.
He offered George Allen a play before the Super Bowl against the undefeated Dolphins, and I may have this wrong, but I think they ran the play and it lost yards.
Which means George Allen, knowing how superstitious he was, he wouldn't talk to a president of the United States ever again.
I heard some incredible stories about George Allen, who I met a few times, and he was always extremely nice to me. He was so obsessed with detail. And this is before analytics and all the things that are now available, just whatever he could divine from his own head. Remember how he would have his teams practice at the time of day that a game would be played.
Sure.
So he'd have like the punt returner fielding a punt coming out of the sun or whatever. And I was told that when they played a road game, that the PR guy or the traveling secretary, whoever was in charge of this, had to make sure that when he checked into his room, there were 2 vanilla milkshakes that had just been delivered, so they were the proper temperature, 2 vanilla milkshakes on the nightstand.
It makes I believe this. I believe this story. Steve Sable told me a story once, Bob, that he was the toughest guy to convince to be mic'd up.
Because he was paranoid.
Paranoid and superstitious. Not just paranoid that something would be picked up, but he was maybe more than paranoid, superstitious. And he and Ed begged him, please, you're one of the more popular head coaches.
Right.
You're the head coach of the Redskins, Washington, D.C. We need you to do this, please. He finally relented, and apparently the Redskins were down 17-0 after the first quarter, and you could see him. They have video, there's film of him running into the RFK dugout, which was the way into the lot, ripping the stuff off. Done.
Sure.
Because he blamed the fact that he finally relented to wear the microphone on the fact that they were losing.
And why our brains make strange connections, but when you mentioned that they were trailing 17-0,
sure,
the infamous play where the kick is blocked in the Super Bowl, and Premian tries to throw the pass, and Bass intercepts it and returns it for a touchdown, so the final score becomes 14-7. But it was a makeable field goal. If it's not blocked and he makes it, the final score is 17-0, and it completes a 17-0 perfect season, because the regular season was 14 games then.
Garrow your Premian.
Which means nothing.
No, but it's numerologists love this sort of stuff. Exactly. The final score would have actually matched their record, 17-0.
Right. It's the sort of thing that the great Vin Scully has partially, and I underline partially because there's such vast texture to what he has done so singularly well, but the kind of thing where he would always say, And ironically enough,
That's right.
and then there would be some connection of that kind that really didn't amount to anything except it was fun to hear him say it.
Bob Costas here in the Rich Eisen Show studio. I know you're running around and things are busy. I don't know if you saw the cover of Sports Illustrated that just came out today. Is Vin
Yes.
on the cover? And I wonder what it took to convince him to actually accept this sort of
my guess,
accolade.
Tom Verducci talked to me for the story. And I think is the combination of the prestige of Sports Illustrated, and Vin is very aware, and Tom is probably on a national level the premier baseball writer. His combination of knowledge of the game, understanding of its history, and just his grace as a writer probably convinced Vin that this was something that he'd be comfortable with.
Well, you know that there's a movement, if you will, afoot.
Yeah.
To try and see if Vin would call the World Series this year. Now, I don't know, what that would mean with Joe Buck, who obviously has a very large respect.
Joe would happily and respectfully step aside.
Right?
He's already said that, and I think any of us would if the World Series were on NBC and it was my decision to make, I would happily step aside. But I also, even though it's his decision to make, he doesn't need my opinion to second his.
Sure.
But I think Vin is correct in declining because that would have a certain spectacle aspect to it, and that's not consistent with who he is. His last broadcast, even though he distinguished himself in the 80s on NBC's baseball broadcast, his last broadcast should be a Dodger broadcast on exactly his terms. That's the way it should be.
Now, do you think Vin, when he's going out right now, do you think he should use his platform to give a statement or anything like that before he leaves? Because I would really love for him, in a way, just to throw it out here, how Eisenhower goes out talking about the military-industrial complex, giving a warning on the state of affairs.
You want to hear Vin's thoughts
on sports, on the state of baseball, and maybe the 21st century sports world as he's going out the door.
I just don't think
on a broadcast.
I don't think that's him.
What about you? What about you? I know you're many, many moons away from your farewell broadcast at some point in your career.
A national broadcaster has a different relationship, no matter how good that person may be. Dick Enberg at his height, Al Michaels now, they have a different relationship than someone who has that more familiar, almost familial relationship with his audience, especially a baseball announcer on a local level. So I don't think a valedictory is called for, even if it was Jim McKay or Jack Whitaker. There might be a circumstance where it seems appropriate, but that's way down the road.
Yeah.
And here's something about Vin, though. Turning it back to that, Vin has always very carefully avoided controversy, and I think that's one of the reasons he has remained so close to universally popular. Nobody, especially in this world, gets a 100% thumbs up, but he comes about as close as anyone in the media could. And part of the reason is, remember when Barry Bonds was approaching Hank Aaron's record, and it was possible that he could have tied it or broken it against the Dodgers. It turned out that he didn't. And Vin's statement was, "It's none of my business. I only do what's between the foul lines," which is interesting because he saw Hank Aaron's entire career. The Braves happened to be playing the Dodgers when he hit 715. And it's one of many great Vin Scully broadcasts, the way he summed up, not the home run itself, not so much the call of the home run itself, but the moment and what it meant. So Vin's thoughts would be worthwhile, but I think that Vin has very carefully steered clear of the issues. We don't know, and I guess we don't care, how he feels about the DH or the expansion of the playoffs or the steroid era. He calls the game, and he calls it beautifully. And I think he's properly calculated that any detours wouldn't serve his own profile. I've taken those detours on occasion, and I think I've made some good points, but I've also taken some hits because of it, and many of those hits have been ill-informed. That's to be kind. Many of those hits have been stupid, but I don't mind I don't mind a reasoned disagreement, but you don't get much reasoned disagreement in the climate that we're in right now.
Right.
So sometimes you say to yourself, is it even worth it to venture a thoughtful, measured, informed opinion when you know that what awaits you is just a slap in the face?
Bob Costas right here on the Rich Eisen Show. We'll take a 60-second break, and we'll talk about the here and now, the Strasburg contract. I'd love to get your thoughts on that. Bryce Harper yesterday getting ejected from a game right before a walk-off home run that he came out and had some choice words for the man who ejected him.
Bryce will be Bryce.
He will be Bryce, and we'll be back with Bob Costas in a minute's time here on the Rich Eisen Show. Welcome back to the Rich Eisen Show. Thursday night on the MLB Network, calling the game up in the Bronx between the Yankees and the Royals, the fourth game of a four-game set. The Yankees took game one last night. Bob Costas will be calling that game, part of a very busy week for you. Bob Costas here in the Rich Eisen Show studio. Tonight is the Emmy Awards.
Sports Emmys.
How many of them have you, in fact, won?
You know, it'd be disingenuous for somebody to say, oh, I don't know.
No, right.
I do know.
Of course. I would know, too.
Yeah, 26.
26 of them.
Tie the Yankees tonight.
That's right.
Nice.
Could tie the Yankees tonight.
A couple of them are not sports Emmys. One was for later, and the other was a news Emmy for the Sandusky interview, and 24 of them are for sports.
Now, what would the news one be the one that you're most proud of?
Well, it's in a different category. Al Michaels was nominated for a news Emmy for what he did spontaneously.
With O.J.?
No, The Earthquake.
The Earthquake.
In 1989, because he was basically ABC's only contact.
He was there?
Yeah, he was there. So he turned into a newsman, and Al lived in San Francisco for a while as the voice of the Giants, and he's a geography nerd. He'll be the first one to tell you. So he knew all the highways and byways, and he was able to look at the monitor and give a completely accurate assessment of what was going on. He was nominated for a news Emmy for that. Didn't win, I don't know why, but certainly that was magnificent work. And Jim McKay was rightly nominated for a news Emmy for what he did in Munich in 1972.
They were all gone.
Yeah.
That line that he would say
Yeah.
in Munich. Bob Costas here on the Rich Eisen Show. Okay, what do you make of the Strasburg contract? 7 years, 175. What do you think of it, Bob?
He's pitching remarkably well right now, and they've got their fingers crossed that the one Tommy John surgery was enough. You know, we're now in an era where kids get Tommy John surgery when they're in high school or when they're in the minor leagues.
Preemptively,
Yeah,
right?
preemptively. Or they get it out of the way with a guy in his first or second year in the majors when he's 22 so that he can be back and ready to get into his prime. So we're getting to where pitchers will have 2 Tommy John surgeries. Some will have 3. It's possible. But 2 will not be all that unusual.
Well, if you get 2, you get the third one free, right,
Yeah.
Bob? I think that's the deal. That's
exactly.
the 21st century deal. You get a coupon for it
that's
after
right.
the first. Yeah, sure.
That's right.
It's like challenges in the NFL. If you get the first 2 right.
Yeah, you buy in bulk. But they're counting on him being healthy. If he's healthy, then obviously he's worth that money based on what modern baseball economics are.
Certainly, when you look at the free agents that'll be available for pitchers right now, I mean, they're not even in his area code. I mean,
And that's part of what they're thinking about.
Now the Nationals have to be sitting here thinking how all the pieces fit when Bryce Harper gets paid, because that day is coming. That day is absolutely coming.
That day is coming, and we could be talking $400 million. We could be talking a 10-year deal for $400 million when you're talking about Bryce Harper. And the problem for the Nats is going to be not that they're a lower-level franchise in terms of revenue, but the Yankees are going to come after him. And he's going to say, think about the star I could be in New York. And more than that, left-handed hitter in that ballpark.
Yeah.
I mean, he could hit 60 home runs in a good year in the prime of his career, not steroid-aided. You know, he'd be a 50 home run guy by accident in that ballpark.
Well, who is he, though? You know what I mean? Like, don't get to know him. And you could say that about a lot of the baseball players, too.
Yeah.
For football players, even though they have the helmet on in front of them, you don't see their face. We know who a lot of these guys are. In baseball, you don't hear. I mean, we had Eric Hosmer on the show today. It was great to get to know him. I mean, Harper doesn't do many national interviews. McCutchen, Trout, you hear every now and then. It's just, you don't.
Well, think of the stars that baseball has now. Think of Clayton Kershaw. Think of Jake Arrieta. Think of the story that the Cubs are. The guys you just mentioned, Andrew McCutchen, Mike Trout, Bryce Harper, it isn't like they lack for attractive young stars.
Yes.
But I think one of the differences is that football has pregame shows on networks
Yes.
that people watch. So you see, even if it's just a little fluff thing, a 3-minute sit down with Cam Newton, we've seen a zillion of them with Peyton Manning and with Tom Brady. Baseball does not have that equivalent. We have the MLB network, which I'm happy to be proud of, but that almost by definition serves avid fans.
Right.
So the average person, I would say, knows Cam Newton. Let's say you like football and baseball equally. You got a better sense of Cam Newton than you do of Bryce Harper. Although, with all due respect to Cam, at this point, I'd say Bryce Harper is a more accomplished baseball player than Cam Newton is a football player. At this point.
I've got the commissioner, Commissioner Manfred, going to be here in that chair that you're sitting in on Thursday. What do you think is his biggest challenge right now, 2016 on May the 10th?
I think it connects to what we're talking about, and I think he will tell you the same thing. It's to get more kids playing baseball and to get young people in a short attention span world interested in the game. And part of that isn't just marketing, it's speeding the game up. And a lot of what's at work is working against that. You have so many hard throwers. There's no stigma connected to swinging and missing and striking out anymore. So by definition, there are more pitches thrown. You go deeper and deeper into counts. I was startled to learn that more than 50% of all at-bats in the major leagues last year, slightly more than 50%, went to 2 strikes. And some of those obviously are 2-2 and 3-2 and foul balls. And now you're going to go deep into the bullpen. You're going to have pitching changes. You're going to have guys coming out or averaging more than a strikeout per inning pitched. And then, since the technology indicates that we should do it, you're going to have replay challenges. So the game, I've always loved baseball's leisurely pace, but sometimes it has kind of a lethargic pace, and that's an issue.
Yeah, I know. And I've got, as you know, Susie and I have young kids. I've got a 7-year-old and a 5-year-old, and when they're not swinging the bat, they're out in the field making dirt piles and things like that. And one of them is into it, one of them is not. And it's tough. It's when they're playing hoops or soccer, they're constantly running around and moving, and they're into it, you know. And Buck Showalter was on the show a couple weeks ago, and he said it's not on the Harpers of the world to make baseball, quote unquote, fun again. It's on people like him and the coaches to get out there and keep the kids interested during a practice. And if you might be 6'5", but guess what? You want to play catcher? Go put on the pads. You want to be a shortstop and you're 5'2" and you got a pop gun arm? Guess what? I don't care. Get out there and throw it from deep in the hole. And that's what he said needs to be done.
You know what's something you never see anymore? And to me, a person of a certain age who loves baseball, it's poignant. You drive by perfectly manicured ball fields, and unless there's an organized game with uniforms and coaches and parents, that ball field is almost always empty. When I was 10, 12 years old, any sandlot, and you didn't even have to organize a game. We didn't have cell phones. You got on your bike with your glove, you showed up at the schoolyard or at the sandlot, and there'd be guys there. And you played however many guys you had. If you only had 6 guys, maybe you couldn't hit the right field or whatever it was. But we played pickup baseball. And then when you played Little League, there was a new baseball. You know, it was pearl white, and that felt different. But that was twice a week when you played Little League or when you played a high school game. You still played baseball all summer long. Now, you see that in the Dominican Republic. You see that in any number of Hispanic-speaking countries, but you don't see it in Des Moines as much as you used to.
Well, and I love baseball. All that said, I am choosing to take my wife to see Hamilton tonight instead of the Yankees and the Royals. I'm actually choosing that.
You've made a good choice.
I'm going Alexander Hamilton over Josh Hamilton. Right? Is that the question? That's our poll question, right?
Yes.
RickEisenshow.com?
Yeah, Bob, who's your favorite sports Hamilton? Josh Hamilton, Scott Hamilton, Laird Hamilton, Richard Hamilton.
Rip Hamilton of UConn fan.
Well, I've worked with Scott Hamilton on the Olympics.
That's right.
I hope he'll take no
Answer
offense.
carefully.
So as a baseball fan, I'm going to go with Josh Hamilton.
There we go.
Josh Hamilton second at 20%. Scott Hamilton last at 9%.
What's up?
Richard Hamilton 54%.
There we go.
Wow.
See, Bob's an outlier, right?
Well, the Detroit Pistons tweeted out the link, and all the Detroit fans.
The social media effect.
Think about the people who could have been heroes, but for turns of events. After after David Freese hit the ball that Nelson Cruz misplayed into a triple, and the Cardinals miraculously tied Game 6 in 2011 at Busch Stadium, Josh Hamilton hit a 2-run homer in the top of the 10th. They're up by 2 again.
That's right.
The Cardinals tied it on a 2-out hit by Lance Berkman, and Josh Hamilton was lost to history.
And and now he's lost in this poll, which is definitely something that I'm sure he's taking very hard. Tackle the toughest dirt, oil, and grease in your garage with new Gunk All-Purpose Cleaner and Degreaser. It delivers the powerful degreasing punch that you expect, nay, require, from Gunk on any surface, even plastic and aluminum. Get new Gunk All-Purpose Cleaner and Degreaser today at Advance Auto Parts. One more segment with Bob Costas before we wrap things up on this Tuesday, New York City edition, and set you up for the rest of the week. Don't go anywhere. Back with Bob in a moment. On tomorrow's show, Seth Meyers of NBC's Late Night with Seth Meyers. Tom Condon, a man who's been in the news lately with his client, Sam Bradford. He's also Drew Brees' agent. He will be on. And Scott Van Pelt, who is one of the Emmy-nominated sports studio hosts, up tonight for the award, along with my in-studio guest here, Bob Costas. I want to thank Eric Hosmer and Tony Goldwyn. And thank you, Bob. I appreciate you coming in.
It was fun.
Always fun. I'd love to have you in Los Angeles when you're calling. Next time you're calling Dodger.
A cooking segment.
That just went down. What was the last cooking segment you were part of, ever?
I filled in for Matt Lauer for a week on the Today Show about a decade ago.
And
I had to do all those things.
Uh-huh.
And, I got to tip my cap to Matt because and I actually have a cap in this instance. Here's a guy who can do a totally credible interview with the President of the United States.
Yes.
And then none of the lint from an ambush makeover ever lands on his perfectly tailored suit. Somehow he can navigate this in brilliant fashion. So I, on the other hand, would be standing there, and somebody would be cooking up a souffle, and I would have to partake. And I felt somewhat awkward. I don't think it was my finest moment.
Well, let me tell you something. I mean, and plus, I can't even imagine the time that he wakes up. I don't know when he hits the alarm clock at 4 a.m. to do all of that, too, every single day also.
Yeah, I was in a foul humor for that entire
I
week.
So. Yeah, that's not what you're supposed to be on a morning show.
No.
Like, gosh, look who's up next.
I wasn't appropriately chipper. I didn't have that Al Roker thing going.
Here's what's happening. And tell me about your neck of the woods. I don't care.
Damn it.
So thanks for coming on. Have a good call of the Yankees and the Royals on Thursday night. And like I said, when you're, thank you. I'm very much looking forward to it. And this is the highest praise. I'm not gonna the hype. It lives up to the hype. Correct? Hamilton lives up to the hype.
There isn't a single person who doesn't think so.
Well, Peter King was. I think he was into it. He was kind of telling me that he didn't understand some of the.
He said it just moved very fast.
Yeah, but that's because there wasn't a Starbucks in the lobby, so he couldn't get into full coffee nerdness.
That was true. That's true. And then also on the show later on this week, the Commissioner of Baseball, Rob Manfred, and Ben McKenzie. So the winner of the poll question, when it all comes down to it, is
Richard Hamilton, 52%.
There we go.
Wow.
He's got that going for him.
Which is nice.
Which is very nice. And Chris Law, of all the people who could not keep the yolk together when cooking.
Nobody's more disappointed in themselves.
It was his idea.
Yeah. And you know who didn't even get a mention?
Who's that?
I don't even know the first name, but the Hamilton from Hamilton, Joe Frank and Reynolds.
Didn't even make it.
Don't pull your love out on me, baby. If you do, then I think that maybe I'll just lay me down, cry for 100 years.
And that'll wrap it up.
The Rich Eisen Show, weekdays at noon Eastern on Audience.